"She will not stay the week," said the Duke of Marlcliffe, watching from the cold height of the gallery window as yet another carriage clattered down the avenue and away. "None of them stay. Send word to the agency that I am done with their ladies." His steward, Hobbs, said nothing, for there was nothing to say that had not been said before. Felix, Duke of Marlcliffe, turned from the window and walked back into the half-dark of a house that had been built for 200 souls and now held barely a dozen. The dust sheets lay over the furniture like snow that never melted. The fires were lit in 3 rooms only. The rest of the great grim pile at Marlcliffe stood shut and silent, and the village said it was haunted, and the village was not entirely wrong, though the ghost was no spectre but a living man who walked its corridors at night and could not say what he was looking for. He had advertised for a wife the way a man pulls a rotten tooth, because it must be done and because no gentler means remained. He was 39 and the last of his line, and the lawyers spoke of the title passing to a distant cousin he despised, and so he had let it be known discreetly, through an agency in town, that the Duke of Marlcliffe would receive ladies of good family who might consider an alliance. They came. They saw the locked wings and the shrouded furniture and the master with his grim silence and his reputation, and they heard the wind in the broken chimney that the servants swore was a woman weeping, and they fled, 4 of them, in as many months. He had stopped troubling to learn their names, so he did not at first trouble to learn hers. She arrived on a wet afternoon in a hired gig, with a single trunk and a bonnet some years out of fashion, and she stood in the vast cold entrance hall and looked about her at the dust sheets and the dim and the grandeur gone to grey, and the Duke, watching her from the shadow of the stair, waited for the flinch. It did not come. "It is a beautiful house," said Drusilla Cobbett. He came down the stair slowly. "It is a cold one, Miss Cobbett. The agency will have told you. I keep 3 rooms warm and the rest shut. There are no balls here, no neighbours I will receive, no society. The last lady to stand where you are standing lasted until the soup grew cold, and then called for a carriage. I am told the house frightens her still." "I am not easily frightened, your grace." She set down her own small valise, which he noticed no servant had been sent to carry. "I have been poor, which frightens most people a great deal more than a shut wing and a draught. May I see the house?" No one had asked to see the house. They asked to see the way out. He showed her, because he could think of no reason to refuse, and because some perverse part of him wished to watch her resolve crack, room by shrouded room. He took her through the dead morning room, and the gallery where his ancestors glowered from their frames, and the long dining hall where one end was kept for him and the other vanished into dark. She walked through it all with a still, attentive face, and where another lady would have shuddered, she paused at a window and said, "This room would hold the morning sun if the shutters were drawn back," and at a covered shape in the corner she lifted the sheet with 2 fingers and found a pianoforte beneath, and she pressed a single key, and a clear sweet note rang out into the silence as though the house itself had drawn a startled breath. "It is in tune," she said, surprised. "My mother played," said the Duke, and was himself surprised that he had said it. That night, over the cold soup that she did not call her carriage to escape, he told her plainly the thing the agency had not. "There is talk of me in the county. You will have heard it. They say the house is grim because the master is grim, and they are not wrong. I am not a comfortable man, Miss Cobbett. I have lived alone a long while, and I have grown into the shape of it. I will not pretend to you to be other than I am, for you would learn the truth soon enough and despise me for the lie." She considered this gravely, turning her spoon. "Then I shall not pretend to be other than I am," she said. "I am poor and plain, and I have come here, because I have nowhere else to go and no fortune to tempt a kinder husband. That is the whole of my dowry, that I will not flee. If that is enough for you, your grace, it is enough for me. And if it is not, I will go in the morning, and we need neither of us speak of it again." He looked at her down the length of the dim table, this small, steadfast woman in her unfashionable gown, and he found that the answer rose in him before his pride could stop it. "Stay," he said. She stayed. He had expected her to be a quiet presence in 3 warm rooms, a wife in name who would trouble him as little as he troubled her. He had not reckoned on what a steadfast woman does with a house that has been left to die. She began with the morning room. He came down one day to find the dust sheets folded away and the shutters thrown back, and the great windows scoured, and the spring light pouring in across a floor that had not seen the sun in a decade. She had found beeswax somewhere and set the 2 remaining maids to polishing, and the wood glowed, and there were flowers, actual flowers, cut from the strangled garden and standing in a chip jug on the sill. "You might have asked," he said, more startled than angry. "You would have said no," she answered, not looking up from the brass she was rubbing, "and then you would have sat in the dark another 10 years. I find it is easier, with a stubborn thing, simply to begin." He did not know whether she meant the house or the master of it. He suspected she meant both. Room by room, the great grim house came back. She drew the sheets from the furniture and aired the shut wings and coaxed the chimneys clean, and the weeping wind, it turned out, was only a cracked flue that a sweep set right in an afternoon. She found his mother's music in a chest and played it of an evening, badly and with great determination, and the sound went out through the warming rooms, and the Duke, sitting with a book he was not reading, found that he had come to listen for it. She asked him once, gently, about the shut wings, why the east rooms in particular had been closed and bolted and left longest to the dust. He had not meant to answer. But she had a way of asking that demanded nothing, that left a man free to speak or not, and so he found himself telling her, haltingly, that those had been the family room his father's day when the house was full, that there had been brothers and sisters once, and Martha, and a mother who played the pianoforte he had heard her tune, and that one by one they'd gone to fever, to marriage, to the grave until last, rattling alone in a house built for a family that no longer existed, and that he had shut the rooms because he could not bear to walk through them and hear how quiet they had become. She did not pity him. He had braced for pity, the soft, useless kind the fled ladies had offered, and it did not come. She only said, after a while, "Then we shall not leave them shut. A house grieves its empty rooms the way one grieves his empty years by going round them in the dark. The cure for both, I have found, is to walk straight in and open the windows." And she had risen the next morning and unbolted the east wing, and let the spring in, and it had not been unbearable after all. It had only been quiet, waiting to be filled. The tenants were her doing too. Though she went about it so quietly, he scarcely marked the change until it was made. She had asked him, one evening, why the cottages on the West Acres stood empty, and he had told her shortly that the families had gone, that men did not stay where the master never came, and she had said nothing at all, to that no reproach, no sigh, only set it by in the steady ledger of her mind. A week later he found her in the gig with a basket, returning from the village, and when he asked where she had been, she said simply that a tenant's wife was brought to bed of a child and wanted broth, and that she had taken it, since no one else had thought to. He had stared at her. It had not once occurred to him, in 2 years of grim solitude, that the carrying of broth to a labourer's wife was a thing a duchess might do, or that the doing of it might bind a parish to a house more surely than any rent could. "You will make them love you," he said, half in wonder. "I would rather," she answered, "make them not afraid of you. It is a beginning. Love comes after, where it comes at all." He found himself, too, contriving reasons to be where she was. He told himself it was the accounts, or the question of the roof, or the matter of the tenants she had begun gently to ask him about, but it was none of those things. It was that the house had been cold for so long, and she was warm, and a man may live a great while in the cold before he understands how cold he has been. There came a night of high wind, when the old house groaned and the weeping flue had not yet been mended, and he found her on the back stairs in her wrapper with a candle, going up to see that the maids were not frightened. He had thought, watching her climb, of all the fine ladies who had fled this house at the first cry of that wind, and of this small steadfast woman climbing toward the sound of it to offer comfort, and something in his chest, long frozen, gave way by a degree. He did not speak. He only took the candle from her hand and went up the stairs ahead of her, so that for once in his life he should be the one to meet the dark first. And he heard, behind him in the stairwell, the soft surprised breath of a woman who had not expected to be spared anything by anyone ever again. One evening he came upon her in the long gallery, drawing the last sheet from the old harp that had stood shrouded there since his childhood. The candles were lit. She had filled the gallery with candles, dozens of them, and the dead room that had glowered at him all his life stood gold and living, and his ancestors looked down from their frames as though they too were warmed. "You have made it beautiful," he said. She turned. There was dust on her cheek and a fierce gentleness in her face. "It was always beautiful, Your Grace. It had only forgotten." "And I?" The question came out of him before he had decided to ask it. "Had I forgotten too?" She set down the sheet. The candlelight stood between them, and behind her the warmed gold of the room she had raised from the dead. "I think," she said slowly, "that you shut yourself away with the rest of the house, because it hurt less than being lived in. And I think you have been waiting, without knowing it, for someone stubborn enough to draw back the sheet." He crossed the gallery to her. He was not a man who had ever found words easy, and he did not find them easy now, but he had learned, watching her these many weeks, that a thing left in the dark only grows colder, and that the way to mend it is simply to begin. "I married you out of necessity," he said. "I will not pretend otherwise, for I have promised you I would never lie. But I do not stand here out of necessity, Drusilla. I stand here because you walked into the coldest house in the county, and you were not afraid of it, and you were not afraid of me, and you have warmed every room you have entered, and the last room you warmed was the one I had given up for lost." He took her hand. "It was rough from the work she had no need to do and had done anyway. I did not know I had a heart left to give. You have spent 2 months proving to me that I had. I would give it to you now, if you will have it, not as a duke discharging a duty, but as a man who has fallen, entirely and against all his intentions, in love with his wife." The dust sheet slipped from her fingers to the floor. She looked up at him in the candlelight, and her steadfastness, which had not broken at the cold or the dark or the weeping wind, broke now into something soft and brimming. "I have had nothing my whole life, Your Grace," she whispered. "No fortune, no beauty, no place that was mine. I came here for shelter, and I expected nothing more. And you are offering me—" "Everything I have," he said, "which is, I am aware, a cold house and a grim man and a deal of dust. But the house is warming, and so, Drusilla, am I." She laughed then, the dust-streaked, candlelit laugh of a woman who had stopped expecting to be happy and had been overtaken by it anyway. And when he drew her gently into his arms she came without hesitation, and he rested his chin against her hair and felt, for the first time in longer than he could name, that the great house was no longer empty. They were wed in the village church a second time that spring, properly, before God and the tenants and the astonished county, who had come half to gawk at the grim Duke of Marlcliffe, and stayed to weep at the look on his face. He drew the heavy signet ring from his own hand at the altar rail and pressed it into her keeping along with the wedding band, for the seal of Marlcliffe had passed, he told her, into surer hands than his. The house was never grim again. There were fires in every room and flowers on every sill, and the doors of the shut wings stood open, and the wind in the chimney was only the wind. The village stopped saying Marlcliffe was haunted. They said instead that the Duke had found himself a wife who could thaw stone, and they were not entirely wrong. In the long evenings, when the candles were lit and his wife sat playing his mother's music a little less badly each year, the Duke of Marlcliffe would set down his book and simply watch her in the gold of the warmed gallery, and he would think how strange it was, And how merciful that of all the ladies who had fled his cold house, the one who stayed had been the one who carried the whole of summer in her steadfast heart.